All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Nick Borlow. I am a research fellow at the Jeff Bleich Centre for Democracy and Disruptive Technologies. So this is our first inaugural JBC Lunch Talk. So this will be an ongoing series where we bring fantastic speakers to come and discuss about very important challenges to democracy and society in general. Today, we're lucky to have Professor Michelle Ryan with us. But before we get started, I just wanted to take some time to acknowledge that we're meeting here today on the land of the Kaurna people, who are the traditional custodians of the land, and we pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging. Yeah, so we're going to have Emma Thomas to introduce our speaker today, who is the Deputy Director of the JBC.
Good afternoon, everyone. So it's my really great pleasure to introduce Professor Michelle Ryan. Professor Michelle Ryan is a professor, obviously, of social and organisational psychology at the Australian National University in Canberra. And she's also the director of the Global Institute for Women's Leadership. The Global Institute for Women's Leadership, JUL for short, was founded by Julia Gillard with this sort of relatively simple mission of bringing together academics, community, organisations to try and achieve greater gender equality in democracies and across the world. Michelle has a extensive track record in scholarly research addressing the drivers of gender inequality, and with Alex Haslam isolated the phenomenon of the glass cliff, which is the phenomenon whereby women are more likely to be appointed to precarious leadership positions when a company is struggling. And that was awarded some sort of Time magazine Idea of the Year. So I don't know anyone else that has been awarded Time magazine's Idea of the Year. And generally is known, I guess, internationally as an awesome person, an amazing mentor. And I guess personally had an impact actually on my own career trajectory when 26 years ago, Michelle was my undergraduate tutor at ANU when I was there back in the day, right before she left to go and join work with Alex Haslam at the University of Exeter. So Michelle was part of a group of academics that actually had a huge impact on my scholarly thought and early development as well. So we won't hold her responsible for that, but I know we are all looking forward to hearing Michelle's talk about the 4 missteps preventing gender equality in modern democracies. Please join me in welcoming Michelle.
Thanks so much, Emma. Thank you. While you do that, I was just going to say, I can't believe anything like that 26 years ago. I'm sure we were teenagers back then. Yeah, that's right. So it's really great to be here. Thank you so much. I've just spent 4 days dancing at WOMAD, so I just have to shift gears and move into work mode, but I'm really, really very happy to be here. I'd also like to acknowledge that we're on unceded Kaurna land as well. Always was, always will be. I've got 20 minutes, and I'm going to go through a whole line of research, so it's going to be much more conceptual, high level, little bit of data, but not lots of data, but there should be lots of time for conversation, I think, and I'm happy to pass on papers and more information about methods and stats, which all underlie all of this. So what I'm going to talk about today is often when people talk to me about gender equality, they often say things like, what's the one thing that we can do to achieve gender equality? And when I get that question, I often think, well, if there was one thing we could do to achieve gender equality, we would have done it already. It's not that simple, it's much more complicated. And so what I often do instead is say, well, what are the things that we shouldn't be doing? And I know that sounds kind of pessimistic, and I don't mean it in a pessimistic way, but I think it's much easier to talk about what we shouldn't do rather than just the one easy thing that we can do. So this was an article that I wrote that I was asked to write for Nature magazine, where they said, can you write about one thing that will change gender equality? And instead I talked about 3 missteps that we often make when we try and do gender equality. And so I'm going to sort of talk through 3 of those and then a bonus one at the end, so a 4th one as advertised. So the first one is that when we do gender equality, we often put an overemphasis on quantity, on numbers. So I think everyone's probably seen a gender equality plan in their organisation or the work group or something like that. And there's a lot of focus on numbers. So how many women are professors, or how many women are in the directorate, or if we're looking more broadly, how many women are in particular ministries, or those sorts of things. So we talk a lot about the number of women in particular roles. And that's important. Underrepresentation is a massive issue, but it's not the only issue. And I think if we put an overemphasis just on numbers, we miss a whole lot of stuff. So one of the things that we miss are the types of positions that women get appointed to. And Emma's so sort of kindly talked a little bit about this already, which is the glass cliff. So if we just focus on the number of women in leadership positions, for example, we don't look at the sorts of positions they might occupy, their experiences in those positions, and what their fate might be in those positions. So about over 20 years ago, we did some work on the glass cliff that really shows that the types of positions women take on are very different from the types of positions men take on. So here's just some anecdotal evidence about this idea that women are more likely to be put in leadership positions that are risky, precarious, and in times of crisis. So Woolworths and Virgin Australia CEOs, when their men stepped down during big crises at Woolies and at Virgin Australia, 2 women stepped up for the first time ever in those companies. Japan's Prime Minister at the moment, first woman Prime Minister in times of great both economic and coalition crisis in terms of politics in Japan. Yacarino took on ex-Twitter when things were going really terribly, and has recently stepped down as well. Did she fall off a glass cliff? And then closer to home, we've got Susan Lee, who, when she was appointed as the first leader of the Liberals after their worst ever electoral defeat, she did an interview and said that she couldn't give a stuff about the glass cliff, but maybe she should have, because she was ousted not very long after. So the idea of the glass cliff, lots of anecdotal evidence, is the idea that women are taking on leadership positions in times of crisis. They often don't last very long. They're often highly criticised when they're in there, particularly problematic. I'm going to take you back all the way to the beginning and just show you some really basic data on the glass cliff. I'm a social and organisational psychologist, so I don't just like to describe phenomena, I also like to understand it. And one of the questions that we had is that, given all this anecdotal evidence about the glass cliff, is there any sort of evidence that women are preferentially selected for these sorts of positions? So, as social psychologists often do, we did experimental research. We tend to do scenario studies a lot in social psychology. So we described these scenarios where we talked about an organisation or some sort of circumstance where everything is either going well or everything is going badly. And we said, we want you to choose a leader when everything's going well or when everything is going badly. And we have a whole lot of different sort of methodologies, but typically we do something like say, look, you've got to choose. Here's a short list of candidates, 1, 2, and 3. They're all pretty qualified for the jobs. Here's a copy of their CV and their background and what they've done. And what's really interesting is that we match candidate 1 and 3 on all dimensions. So their CVs are actually equivalent. The only thing that differs is one is a man and one is a woman. You can see they're sort of equally good looking. They both wear glasses, clearly leadership material. We've got number 2 there as well, who's a little bit less qualified, but we just sort of throw him in the mix to make things a little bit interesting. So then we've got everything going well, everything going badly. Choose one of these candidates. So pretty straightforward. So what do we find? When everything is going well, we find that there's a slight preference for him over her when they just rank the candidates. Who would you like to choose? This is not statistically significant, and remember, they're basically exactly the same person. Their CVs and everything are equivalent. We counterbalance them across people, so they're the same people. He's got a slight advantage over her. When everything is going badly, what we find is they almost exclusively choose her. I gasped exactly like that. The first time I did a study, I didn't think it would be quite so striking, but they almost exclusively choose her. They're actually more likely to choose candidate 2, the one that's not quite as qualified, than this guy as well. So what we found then, across about, I think we've probably done about 40 studies now. Other lab groups across the world have also replicated it many times, is that when you've got a leadership position, people are much more likely to choose a female candidate when everything is going badly. And what I mean by everything is going badly, we've done this in lots of different ways. We've asked lawyers to choose a fellow lawyer for a risky and highly criticised case, and they choose her. We ask business leaders in the community to choose a financial director for a poorly performing company, and they choose her. I had a whole lot of high school students come into the university, and I thought, oh, could I do a Glasscliff study on them? So we described a music festival that was either increasing in popularity or decreasing in popularity. When it was decreasing, they choose her. And if we describe a by-election in an unwinnable seat, the average voter on the street chooses her over him. So then we've got this idea. Anecdotally, we've got all of these examples of women occupying these risky and precarious leadership positions. We've got experimental work that shows that there's something about people choosing women. I'm going to move on to the next one, but we can come back and discuss why that might be a little bit later. So we've got archival work, experimental work, case studies, all showing the robustness of the Glasscliff phenomenon. These positions are risky, they're precarious, and they're stressful, and they really impact women's experience and their tenure in the role. So the average male CEO, for example, lasts about 7 years in their CEO role. The average woman lasts about 2.5 years, often because of these Glasscliff scenarios. It also has a problem for gender equality as well, not just for the experiences of individual women, but if you see women in these risky, precarious positions, they don't last very long. It potentially reinforces stereotypes that women aren't suitable for leadership positions. And if those women are the role models for other younger women or more junior women coming up, it might also turn them off aspiring to those leadership positions as well. So all of that to say, in terms of the implications, is that if we focus on the number of women in leadership positions, on that quantity sort of aspect, we really ignore the nature of the positions that women might be in and the sustainability of those women in those positions as well. So we need to ask much more complicated questions about why and when and how, rather than just a quick top line, how many female professors are there in the room? Okay, so the second misstep when it comes to gender equality is an approach that I call fixing women. So when it comes to gender equality initiatives, there's a whole lot of work out there that really focuses on what I would see as a deficit approach to women. So women aren't confident enough, they're not strong enough, they're not assertive enough, they don't have the right leadership skills, and if we just remedy that by fixing them, then maybe it'll be okay. This was big about 10, 15 years ago, and it's still pretty big now. If you look at gender equality initiatives, it really is something that's done. This is Sheryl Sandberg, who was the Chief Operating Officer of Facebook and then Meta. She wrote this book in 2013 called Lean In, which was a real women's empowerment kind of book, which was basically saying you're doing everything wrong, act a little bit more like a man and you'll probably be okay, essentially. I don't know whether anyone has read a more recent book by a whistleblower from Facebook and Meta called Careless People. Anyone? No? Read it. It's amazing. It's someone who used to work with her that basically says all of this women's empowerment stuff that she says was all just guff and she was awful to work with. It was just like a big gossip book. It was great. Okay, so Sheryl Sandberg is really often talking in the guise of women's empowerment, but I read it very much of the guise of seeing women as not doing things properly, and if they change and adapt, then they'll be more successful. Now, I've got a number of issues with this. I mean, the main one is that it's not really fixing systems and structures, it's just trying to fix women as if there's something wrong with women. And it's also a real individual mobility strategy. So if you can be empowered, you can do better, but actually it's not really lifting all women up and it's not really changing the systems and structures. In the UK, I ran a big European Research Council grant for 5 years trying to look at this idea of, I guess in some ways what I would say is putting the onus on women to change in order to fix gender equality. And the main arguments that we made there is that women's ambition or their willingness to sacrifice or their willingness to be strong and ambitious doesn't occur within a social vacuum, but rather it's shaped and constrained by organisational culture and social contexts as well. So I just want to take you through just a couple of examples of what I mean by that and why I think we shouldn't be trying to fix women, we should be fixing systems and structures as well. So one of the big things that Sheryl Sandberg talks about is ambition. She basically says women aren't ambitious enough. If you're more ambitious, then you'll be fine, you can become a leader. So it opens up, I guess, the empirical question about whether women actually lack ambition. So this is just some anecdotal data that I pulled together. This is old data from the police service. I'm going to triangulate it with some newer data, don't worry. But this is new recruits within the police service. And what you can see is for new recruits, men and women have equal levels of ambition, but by 5 years in, we get this big gender difference with men showing more ambition than women. This is some data that we had. This is some data. It's not moving forwards, is it? Oh. Okay, sorry, it is. There we go. Here's some data from surgical consultants or surgical trainees. So men and women have equal levels of ambition when they start their surgical training, but by their third year of surgical training, we've got this big difference again. This is some data from a university that may or may not be the University of Exeter, where I worked for a long time. Don't look at all of it, but let's look at sciences, which are the most male-dominated. Year one, we've got equal levels of ambition, but by year three, we've got this gender difference coming in again. So what's really interesting here is that it's complicated, right? So there are differences between men and women in ambition, but it doesn't start like that. It appears over time. Now, one of the things that often happens when I talk about this data is that people say, oh, well, I can explain that. It's fine. It's just about women's biological clocks. Like they might start off as ambitious, but over time, you know, they have more interest in kids or family or work-life balance and their ambition drains away. On the face of it, it sounds like that could be a plausible explanation, but it doesn't really fit the data. So if we look at the data, we've got university students going from 18 to 21, dropping off in ambition. The police service data, they're about sort of 20 to 25 is where that change happens. And if you look at surgical trainees, it's really the difference between 30 and about 35 as well. So there's no sort of magical age of, 28 and a half that women's ambition drops off. It seems like there's much more to do with the context that's going on there. So if you look at things like the police force or the operating theatre or the science lab, these are really male-dominated spaces. And what it looks like is the more time you spend as a woman in those male-dominated spaces, the more your ambition gets eroded away. So it really talks about context then and the importance of context for women's ambition. So for me, ambition is really all about forward thinking and motivation looking forwards. If I want to measure ambition, for example, if I'm on a committee hiring a postdoc and you want an ambitious person, perhaps, you would often ask the question, where do you see yourself in 10 years' time, right? Has everyone been asked that question before in a job interview? Yeah, it's pretty common. Okay, so Joe here, when he gets asked, where do you want to be in 10 years' time, he can look up the ladder in his male-dominated space, and there's people like him up there. There's role models that have been successful. There's people like him at the top. Pretty easy for him to see where he might be. But for Mary here, when she looks up, she doesn't have those same role models. She doesn't have that same ability to look at that. So what that really does then is just really focus the idea that women's decisions, their ambition, their motivation, their willingness to sacrifice, all of these things is really likely to be affected by context. We've done a whole lot of studies on this, and I'm not going to sort of take you through all of it, but one is just about sacrifice. So there's often a whole lot of work out there that says that men are willing to make sacrifices for their careers that women are not. And without going through all of the data, what we showed is that women do report often being less likely to make sacrifices for their career, but that's because when they do a cost-benefit analysis of saying, what are they going to get if they make those sacrifices, and they know that they've already experienced discrimination, that there's a real lack of role models, when they balance it out, it's not the same sort of cost-benefit analysis that men are doing. So they're less likely to make those sacrifices, not because they're not ambitious, but because actually the trade-off is completely different. So then if we bring all of that together, things like women's confidence, their ambition, their willingness to sacrifice is really related to how they're treated at work and the culture at work and the role models that they have. And instead of having our friend Cheryl tell us to lean in and women change and that they have to be different, we really should be looking at organisations to make sure that they're giving women something to lean towards rather than trying to fix women. So then my final one here is around over-optimism. This is an interesting one for me because I'm a relentlessly optimistic person in general. But I think what is interesting here is the balance between recognising how many gains we've made, but also how much still needs to happen. I'm writing a laureate about this at the moment, so it's really like front and centre in my brain, about really how you think about gender equality and how you frame it in terms of how much progress we've made, whether the optimism is a good thing or actually whether it stymies things as well. So I'm going to show you a little bit more data in this study just because it's a really cool study. You don't have to read this. But one of the studies that we did was with the veterinary profession. So the veterinary profession is really interesting because it's historically been incredibly male-dominated. So lots of men in there. Just think of that all creatures great and small kind of idea of, men in wellies walking about on farms. Used to be a very prestigious, incredibly prestigious sector. And what's really interesting is in the last 10 years or so, maybe even 15 years, it's become much more female-dominated. So 80% of undergraduate vet students are female. It's one of the hardest to get into. But what's really interesting is when you talk to women in the profession, there's still lots of discrimination. So it's a really interesting sort of space in which it looks like lots of progress has been made, especially when we look at the numbers, which takes us back to the first one, that are numbers enough? But actually there's lots going on there as well. So what we did in this study, I think, which is really interesting, is that we asked people to think about the veterinary profession, and we asked people whether they thought progress had been made or not. And so people could either say, yep, I think that we're okay, gender equality is not a problem anymore, or, which is quite optimistic, or more pessimistic that says, yeah, it's still a problem. Then we also gave them a scenario where we said, look, here is a description of a young vet. It's their annual review after their first year in the job. Here's a little bit about them. They did pretty well on balance. And people either got a vet called Elizabeth or a vet called Mark. Exactly the same people, Elizabeth or Mark. And then we said, can you evaluate this person? How do you feel about them? Do you think they're doing well? How would you treat them if you were their manager? How much would you pay them? And those sorts of things. So got the scenario, Mark or Elizabeth. And then we've got people who are either think everything's really good, they're optimistic, or are more negative about things. Now, what's really interesting is that for those people that think that everything is going well, that everything is optimistic, they pay Elizabeth much less than they would pay Mark. So the more that you agree along here that discrimination is no longer a problem, the bigger the pay gap is between what you would pay Mark and what you would pay Elizabeth. So there's a real paradox here. The more optimistic you are about gender equality, the more discriminating you are towards Elizabeth as well. So then just to draw all of that together then, over-optimism is often about a failure to recognise that gender discrimination is still a problem and it's associated with increased discrimination. But also in other studies that we've done in the medical profession, the more optimistic you are, the less likely you are to support gender equality initiatives as well. So then to draw those three things together, numbers are not enough, quantity of women is important, but the quality of the positions that we give women is also important. Fixing women doesn't tackle the root of the problem and it doesn't lead to systemic change. And while we need to celebrate the wins, that's very important, but over-optimism is associated with discrimination and stymies change. Now, we advertised 4 missteps, so my final one, without going into too much, is something that I've been working on quite a lot, which is our gender equality initiatives often fail to be intersectional. So they often focus, exactly like Sheryl Sandberg does, on white, middle-class professional women and about lifting them up, often leaving lots of other women behind. So that might be based on class, based on sexuality, based on race, based on migrant status, all sorts of things, disability. So there's a real failure to lift all women up as well. that can partly be related to this idea of optimism as well. So we often see certain groups of women thriving, and then we say, oh, it's all fine, it's all okay. But of course, we've done very little to bring those women that are most affected by misogyny up as well. Okay, that's me. Thank you.